Good morning. I don't know where you're joining us this morning from. Joining you today from Brussels. It's 11:02. Thanks for joining us. We really appreciate you joining us on short notice. It means you're forward thinking, you want to be on top of things, and we appreciate that. We share the same desire for knowledge. And so thanks for joining us for Policy Monday. We have taken a break. We had taken a break for like 2 weeks following the Africa Forward Summit that we did a report on. You should check it out. It's on EU Africa collaboration on digital on AI governance, and so that would be great to read. It's available on our website, lawyershub.org. We also hope that you're planning to join us in Geneva for the Africa AI Governance Summit alongside the Global Dialogue on AI, together with the AI for Good Summit that week and WISES. So very packed. We hope that you can be part of the global conversations on artificial intelligence. And so today I'm going to be joined by my colleague Adam. We're going to have this conversation together. There's a lot of unknowns in this conversation, so I urge you to be patient with us, but also to be curious with us to know what this ideally looks like. And so I'm also going to be joined by Titi Akinsanmi. I don't know that she's here. She's joining us, I believe from Canada. Titi, if you're here, feel free to, get in on the chat. I will try and check my phone just in case I'm missing a conversation. Yeah, but I don't know if we could start from what you know, Adam, and then we come back to what I think I know as an outsider and a user of technology. But we give the context from what happened last week. So I'd like to hear your version, and then I'll go to mine.
Sure. Hello, everyone. It's great to be joining you today. As Linda mentioned, my name is Adam. I am a student at Harvard Law School in the US and happy to be talking about this very happening week, this past week, in terms of what has gone down between Anthropic and the US government, speaking a little bit from the US perspective. So, as you all have probably been following, Anthropic recently, this past week, released its Fable 5 model, which was a rapid advancement in terms of an already rapid series of events in terms of models improving in the past couple years, but especially recently. And the US government said that it identified a jailbreak in the model. So essentially, they felt that there was some sort of national security concern where users of the new Anthropic model could sort of get around some of the safety features that Anthropic had implemented. So the United States government exercised its export control laws and told Anthropic that it could no longer allow foreign nationals, both presiding within the U.S. or outside the U.S., to use the model. But because of the way that the cloud AI service works, it wasn't feasible for Anthropic to only identify foreign nationals who were using the LLM. So essentially, it just banned the model globally. So I think that just starting off a little bit on what this means for Africa and sort of the likelihood that this could become more of a common occurrence. I think that two things can sort of be true at once. I think one, this reveals a very important vulnerability to address for the entire African continent that I think we're going to get into in a good bit of detail. That when these models or any sort of infrastructure is hosted on foreign soil, then the services can be sort of pulled at the behest of that foreign government, which is obviously a big vulnerability when you have various important national services running on that technology. However, I think that there are some positive signs that make me hopeful that this is sort of very highly contextual based on the situation. And I think the US has some powerful incentives to try to keep this from happening more in the future, but we can get into more of those reasons later in the conversation. So I guess I'll turn it over to you, Linda, from here.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Adam. You give so much good context on exactly what's happening since Friday. A lot of us are users of Claude and ChatGPT, and the dependency is growing. People are dependent on these apps for, I'll start from therapy, from asking questions on what to do, relationships. I'm seeing that a lot, but then also on productivity, on how you could improve your work. And there's been a migration into the numbers are out there on who moves to Claude. And many of the people have actually abandoned ChatGPT for Claude, which is by Anthropic. And so this is something that interests the continent on what do you exactly mean by by a model going dark. And so today we'll take that approach on when models go dark and what exactly that means for us as an African continent. So I have slides here. They may be terrible slides. Our media team haven't looked at them because there was really short time. But I'm going to ask that you bear with me as we go through step-by-step conversation. We like to educate here so that we are able to be on the same page. And we, as lawyers, will have to argue. There are technologists in the room. So we want to argue with some sort of context. So I would open up my presentation and try and see if I'll make it in terms of presentation. So let me do this. There we go. So please do not blame anyone at the media. It is me if this thing is bad. So this is a summary. And we've had this conversation by Adam, really setting the context on what this looks like. So because Anthropic could not ideally comply with this first because of how do you separate who's a US citizen and who's not. So you're going into KYC and then also its own employees. Two co-founders ideally. Reuters says that you could not tell whether they are American nationals or not. So the easy thing was to bring down the model. And so we've had this worldwide outage. So we'd like in this conversation to understand export control. What does export control mean in the sense of the United States? So what's this foreign direct product rule? How does it apply? Does it affect Africa? And ideally, what's the difference between what the Biden administration did in terms of export control, but also on the other side, what the Trump administration is relying on export control. Stay with us because this concerns you more than you think it does. And we could look at it from a Chinese lens where you do not want these models to ideally be in the hands of China, but you can also look at it in terms of dependency for the African continent. So we are going to see how you can ideally have, the conversation between sovereignty over the server over sovereignty over the license, what ideally these conversations mean for us. So the conversation for a long time has been on export control around chips, the technology. And this has been the conversation on how do you limit other countries. So the conversation has been on one, Netherlands, Germany, Japan, Taiwan. That is where the conversation has been on chip controls. But we haven't ideally seen what this sort of works in the context of models. And today we've seen that with Anthropic. So the questions are, is it an overreach or ideally just using existing legislations to get to Anthropic? If you well know, Anthropic was preparing for its IPO, and so the stakes are high. This, I think, for investors is a question on, how do you extend this beyond hardware? Because it was simply on hardware. And then there's a point that's coming up a lot on choke points. What's a choke point for Africa? We will get to discuss that as well. So does Africa fabricate any sort of frontier compute, or it just trains and it uses on this? If you look at the Africa AI strategy, it talks about its global data center capacity to be less than 1%. 3% of global AI talent is based in Africa, less than 3%. And then we are the ones who zero amongst those that are holding these supercomputers. There was, I think, an improvement in South Africa, which is yet to be to be determined. So if you look at the national AI strategies in the continent, it does not talk about continuity of access, which is one thing that is an omission because you need to continue to get access to this compute, but also these particular models. We have, in the past few weeks, we have discussed different national AI strategies, and the ones that we put in here are simply the latest ones, which talk, whether they talk about continuity or not. In our assessment of what has happened with Anthropic, Mauritius is the one that has the most aligned national strategy when we talk about continuity in the sense. The rest of them are dependent. So, for example, if you read Ghana's national AI strategy, it talks about sovereign LLM, but still within its specific national strategy, it still says it will depend on Google, NVIDIA, and names these particular companies. So they are still US dependent in every single way. And so whatever the foreign export applies, it applies to them as well. And so we also look at the African Union strategy, and we look at the action areas. In terms of continuity of exposure, they are ideally exposed to this particular, legislation in the US. So how do we govern this dependency? And how do we make sure that we do not engineer around this single point of failure? So this conversation is going to look at what can policymakers do to talk about digital sovereignty in sense, but not performative like we see. Can they define model sovereignty in the law? Can they use procurement as a lever so that they mandate continuity? Can they coordinate continentally? What does that look like? And can they also regulate the provider? A few weeks ago, I think 2 or so weeks ago, the EU Parliament, I believe, had one policymaker, either Google or Microsoft, I'm going to confirm, but I was following the news, and they were asked that if you are asked by the US government to hand over data belonging to Europeans, are you going to do it? And they said that they're mandated by the regulation. There's a specific regulation that mandates tech companies in the US. And so we will confirm that as well. And so it means that any particular American company would be subject to this regulation. And that means the extraterritoriality of the regulation ideally holds. If you're a startup and you're building with these APIs by American tech companies, including these models from Anthropic, these regulations ideally apply to you. So do you design for portability to move from one model to another? What kind of portability that is, whether it's Chinese or whether it's local? And what do you do when these models go dark, ideally in terms of continuity, but also in contracts? What are we supposed to do? And so this conversation centers on these particular conversations. If you're from civil society, there's been a push towards having open source. And so the open source community this weekend are all pushing for, oh, we need open source. We cannot ideally rely on these commercial models and what it actually means. We need to talk about that. And then as we're preparing for Geneva, the conversation is on AI dialogue. But what does dialogue mean when you ideally have an imbalance of power? And what can civil society do to ensure that this is ideally fixed? For those who work in antitrust and competition law, this is also a conversation that we'd like for you to ideally come in and speak about. So I want to stop here and open up the floor to my co-panelists. And we also, because this is developing, we're really curious to hear what you're reading, what you're thinking. There's a really great report on export controls. We're going to share that as well on the chat. But this was pre-Anthropic. And now it's been applied to models and the cloud ecosystem. And so I'm going to to introduce Titi Akinsanmi, who's going to introduce herself really well and pronounce her name better than I did. So she could tell us what you're thinking, what's going on. Canada just released its AI strategy last week. And I personally am laughing at every AI strategy because every single week it's being trashed. Like you're being shown, in Nigerian terms, shege, every time you release a national AI strategy. So, Titi, you've been in the space for so long, way before we joined in. You are the policy wonk, you're the experienced one. What are you thinking around what's happening with the US? Some people say it's gone rogue, but I would want to, hear I know you're very diplomatic in your wisest terms.
Thank you, Linda, and I'm really glad I could join. So thanks for reaching out yesterday. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, because I do believe we have people coming, joining us from across the globe. Um, I'm Titi Akinsanmi. Linda, you did a great job actually in pronouncing my name, so kudos to you. Um, and a couple of things. I'm a technology policy wonk, like Linda said. I have been doing this plus or minus for about maybe 26 years now. And one thing that has been constant about me, and I don't take that for granted, is I will say exactly what needs to be said. But I will say it in ways, hopefully, that we can continue to have a conversation. Because consistently, for me, the goal is to help us get into a space where we can actually actively not just negotiate, but agree on how we use this resource that's infinite. I know our conversation today is around AI, but for me, consistently, I have worked around ensuring that access to technologies, emerging technologies, frontier technologies, is not in any way hindered by what you would call political dynamics, which tend to change with the power in the day. But speaking to what's happening with the Fable 5 recall, for those who want to hear a bit of a longer thesis, I'm actually going to plunk it into, I don't know if someone from the team can actually do that. I'll actually just do that now. I wrote a piece and I started writing this piece, initially when the news came out that this pull had happened. I was ruminating on it and I kept thinking, should I write, should I not write, should I write, should I not write? But the thinking, the article would not leave me. So I spent Friday, and I'll give you context on why I'm sharing why this could not leave me. I spent Friday, Saturday, and parts of yesterday pulling what I just shared with you together. And for me, it was really about spending time and thinking through, are there ways that this could have been prevented? Is it really new what is happening? Because sometimes, things happen and we think in a panic, oh, we didn't think about this. But I'll posit it to everyone that actually there's nothing new under the sun. And I actually say this in the article, that this is not the first time we're seeing this behavior from the US, right? Because there's some thinking that, oh, it's because of the current political environment that this is possible. No, it's just more overt, right? There's less of a diplomatic couch, I would say, around the pullback of the rule. And why did I say this would not leave me? My daughter was graduating on Friday, and her mama, even though she was there, was busy thinking about the fact that all of a sudden, this powerful tool that literally everyone had more or less migrated to was all of a sudden unavailable because of one kill switch. So here's my thinking. And again, like I said, I detailed this really, really in my initial article, and it's far from perfect. It's the fact that one, we bump into the fact that seemingly there's a genuine reason as to why the pause has been asked, and I call it flimsy. I know, Linda, you said I can be very diplomatic, absolutely, but I also call a spade a spade. It's a flimsy technical reason, and because of the way it has been framed, meant that it was a really wide catch-all that really looks like, okay, we have no choice. We cannot verify who is what we call a foreign national and who is not, both internal to the institution and external. But there are questions around, are you really not able to determine it? So on the one hand, Anthropic, was there really no choice beyond the blanket ban? And on the side of the US, was it really necessary at this point in time to pull back completely because of a known capacity that exists on other models as well? When I say that, this again is nothing new under the sun. I want to reference two things. And if you've been around long enough, even if you've not been around long enough, if you've been doing research around digital sovereignty, export controls, ability to be able to access or not, you remember two things. In the 90s was the cryptos war. That was when the US decided that strong cryptography as munitions under the International Traffic in Arms regulations. And I want to make sure that I actually call that correctly. That it literally made exporting its secure code a federal crime. This was around cryptography, which is now like an everyday use. And there was a whole hula baloo on the impact it would have and the risk it presented to the country. But it didn't stop encryption. I want to hold on. I want us to hold on to that. What it actually did is actually impacted on America's ability to be able to be competitive. And I'm coming to our continent, right? But I wanted to be able to show that when a government decides to kill a fly with a bazooka, right? It ends up creating even more chaos rather than actually addressing the immediate problem. That's how heavy-handed regulation can be in some cases. The second is what happened during the Galileo crisis, when the US military decided that it wanted to retain its ability to selectively degrade or shut up GPS signals for foreign actors. Now, the EU then decided they were going to build their own independent Galileo satellite constellation, but it was really high capital expenditure. But they did get strategic autonomy over the next few years, which then enabled diversification and competition. For me, at this point, and there are other examples that exist, but at this point, these are classic examples of how this has happened before. How, even if you look at the internet, how historically there has been an attempt to limit people's ability to be able to access it, to use it, which led to the development of VPN, etc. So to a certain extent, and allow me this, it's a good thing that this has actually happened because it's a wake-up call like never before, right? I see, Linda, that in your, and I don't know why your slides look great. They're very intellectual. But one thing that stood out to me is the continuity of access not being written into any of the strategies. The same, not just on the African continent. If you look at the Canada AI strategy as well. Why? Because there's an assumption that there will always be access. And I recall, again, I've been working in this sector for so long. One of the first papers you probably can find written by me is written access to access. Literally access to access. And this was way back in the 2000s, in the days of the World Summit on the Information Society, how we need to ensure that access to access is uninterrupted and that it is guaranteed in the law. So apart from the recommendations that I actually make, or in addition to the recommendations that I make in this initial article, again, with my brain still grappling with what has happened, is that we need to recognize that, yes, it's good for us to write laws with the emerging technology. But even more important is that we have the existing regulatory principles around access to technology, around the right at any point in time to be able to access technology in a locally relevant language in a way that is understandable to the end user. We need that it continues to be inbuilt in this AI strategy. And I want to land with this because I don't want to hog the whole time. I want to be able to have a conversation around this. Is that as the African continent, yes, we might not as yet have immediate control or be at the forefront of building frontier models, but we have an amazing innovating ecosystem that's taking the available open source and even closed models and building on it in really interesting ways. And part of what I'm going to do is I'll actually find some of them and start putting it in the chat. So that's one. That we actually have access to these technologies, but do we have the right enabling environment and ecosystem that's helping to build it? Two, at no point in time have I in my career, and will I ever advocate for just one pathway. So yes, open source. But even the open source is built on things that can potentially be pulled back. I will always advocate for a diversified stack. And then you will hear some people like, oh, but that's pretty expensive. Yes, absolutely. But it is worth it that we do not at any point in time find ourselves in this position. So thankfully, it's Fable 5 and Claude 5, right? That were, pulled back. There's everything else. It's still accessible. Competition means, yes, there's Anthropic, but there's Gemini, there's ChatGPT, and a whole bunch of other models that we're really not engaging with. But we do not want to find ourselves in a position where the only reliance we have is on one, whether it's built in Africa, because sincerely, we do have dictators who will do similar things,
That's
albeit this
true.
came from a democracy. So we need to keep that in mind, that in as much as we are building, I am not going to advocate for us to then flipping completely open source models. No, it will not work. We need to ensure that we have enough variety, the same way we have on this call, the same way we have on the continent, such that if, allow me, a Ferrari is not working, a trusty old Toyota is still accessible. It might do it slightly slower, but you still have it as a backup. That, for me, is the core of the lesson here. When you design regulations and policies, whatever label you give them, design them in a way that they are not technology specific. Design them in ways that speaks to the capability and the ability to be able to access those capabilities. Thank you, Linda.
Right. Thank you so much, Titi. You make really great points. And I think the first point is on immigration, which is super, super important. You can go and build in another country, but ideally you may not even own the model that you yourself invented. The second thing I think is on extraterritoriality. Anybody who's on this call, any lawyer, I want you to understand this fact because it may look like people are overreacting. But provided, assume you're cooking, you're making maybe what I made for breakfast today. You have eggs and you have onions and you have your oil or butter. Provided the onions come from the US, it is subject to the foreign direct product rule. I want you to hear that very well. So if you're building and anything, the API you're using, the technology you're using, it comes from the US, you're subject to that particular regulation. That means everything, because it's become very easy to just build on APIs and not to do anything. So Anthropic's own model lies on AWS. So a lot of us rely on AWS for space, for build anything. So the world is at a point where it's wondering, what do we do? Where do we go from here? And so I want to bring back all my panelists. I don't know, Adam, what you're thinking as this is going on. I also want to hear if anybody has questions, what you people are thinking about this and what Africa could ideally do to move. Because if Europe is saying that very dependent on American technology like that, what happens to the rest of us? What happens to China? Because I think, Titi, you make a great point on, we are not transferring this power to China. We want power that everybody can ideally have access. And I agree with you on the whole idea about, dictators and what dictators are doing around the world, and they will just come up with something. In this case, the US government did not shut down the model. It's Anthropic who did it themselves and said, we ideally cannot comply, and so we will do this instead. And so I'd like to hear your thoughts around this, thoughts around procurement, because governments are still doing calls. I want to say this publicly. I personally cannot get any contract from any government in Africa to consult for them. And so this is what's happening. People are getting the contracts and they are then subcontracting me to advise the same governments to do these things. It's in procurement. And so they will get money from the World Bank or whatever organization is there to do it, or even from the EU. And then the requirement is that our nationals must do this work. And so the nationals will get the first piece of work, but because they have no context, they will hire Linda and people like Linda to then now do this particular piece of work. It beats logic. And so we want to say it's a really great time to re-examine how the world looks like. And for me, this is not any attack on the US or whatever, but it's really a point for us to say there is power in technology. We may not have the capacity, but the first thing in capacity building is to let people know that your naivety is costing every one of us. Because when we are naive and we do not see these scenarios as we're building national AI strategies, it costs the whole world. Because, for example, if you look at the chips debate and what's happening, Netherlands has been dependent on this because ideally they made a deal with the United States. We know what's happening with Taiwan, and so when we come back to the conversation and talk about Congo and where all these things are coming from, if this flip or if we switch, I'm sorry, my English is bad this Monday morning, but if we flipped everything and said, let Congo do the same thing, anything that has lithium, anything that has minerals, it belongs to Congo. This is what Congo would do to the world. It's not fair, even if Congo did it. It's not fair to the rest of the world. How do we coexist in this world and make sure that ideally we can reach? But also, those that had the opportunity to stop these big companies. The first time I ever went to the US, I was asked, what do you want to say? And I said this, these were my first words at a fellowship. I said, the failure of America to govern its companies have made them so big and so unstoppable that it's a problem for the rest of the world. Linda Khan, I forget her first name, Khan, she had a point. She said, do not allow tech companies to be unruly, to be ungovernable. And now she's running New York. And we saw what happened last week with the Hicks, the game and everything. The millionaire said, I'm not going to live stream the game. And what did Mamdani do? He said the game will be live streamed everywhere on the streets in New York, and people watch the game. Sometimes that's what you do to millionaires because when they have too much money, they get out of way, and then they kill the rest of the world. So I believe this conversation is for each and every one of us to see what piece of the puzzle you can fill in your small neighborhood so that this gets fixed. But how do we fix it now that we know the problem? What do we do? What do we amend? How do we move forward? So I'll start with you, Adam, on what you're thinking, and then we'll go to the questions.
Yeah, thank you, Linda. There is a lot to address here. I think one of the main questions that I currently have in my head when we're trying to assess what should Africa's risk tolerance be for a situation where, we have the US routinely switching off AI access to Africa or the rest of the world. Like, I think it's important to answer how likely do we really think a situation like that is to come up routinely? And then based on that assessment, how much risk tolerance do we want to have, and how much funding should we sort of apply to try to diversify our stack? And I've been thinking about this a lot this week, and I think that there are compelling arguments on both sides. I think we've already brought up a number of the historical arguments, the way that the U.S. and the Trump administration is trending toward being more restrictive. But I think I would also like to add some arguments that make me a little bit more optimistic that, while the situation this week is concerning, I'm not quite sure it's cause for, like total pandemonium per se. So a couple points that I think are important to add to the context. So first of all, there are powerful business incentives for the US to be competing with China. I think some people have put this in the chat already. I've certainly seen a lot of backlash among private industry professionals within the US in the past weeks, sort of saying that by implementing these export controls, the US is sort of giving China a key strategic advantage. And if the US wants to win the AI arms race with China, then it can't continue doing things like this. I think it's also important to contextualize that, this export control was sort of limited to this very new model that was sort of a rapid increase in the capability of the LLMs, the likes of which we haven't really seen at this point in the arms race. And they only shut off the access to the frontier models, and it's a global shut off. It's not just restricting, certain countries. Anthropic is actively disputing these safety concerns, and they're fighting it. And as I mentioned, there's a lot of internal outcry in the US that this is bad for business. All of the other Anthropic models are still accessible. And this is the first time in the sort of AI context that export controls have been used in this way. So I think, there are a number of compelling reasons to be very concerned about this, especially in light of the US military and their dispute with Anthropic. And I think there are some important political dimensions to keep in mind as well. But at the same time, I'm not quite sure that this week's events alone warrant a massive upheaval in, devoting a lot of funding to like rapidly diversifying the stack as soon as possible. But I think regardless, it's important to be having these discussions about continuity and making sure that we're moving forward in that direction as much as possible.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And you also talk about Anthropic as a company, I believe. There are people who do not believe in, Dario's leadership, and, what he's doing in terms of compliance. But also, I think the other cases we've had around Palantir using the Anthropic's technology for military use. I think, and I want to say this, I don't like the fact that there's no adequate effort around use of AI in the military domain. And we've seen this from the UN perspective. Even the global dialogue that's coming up does not talk about military use of AI. The most important things where AI will be used, these people will kill us as we are watching, because they have too much money and they have access to go to space. So they will leave us here dead. But that's to overreact. But I agree with you that I think Anthropic as a company also is to blame in terms of you asked about its capabilities, what you're doing to do this. But some people say that Dario asked for it. He kept saying that they should be regulated. When a model is this capable, then this should happen. And so someone says they asked for it. Let's give it to them. Let's give them to what regulation looks like. But on the flip side, what's self-regulation looking like? Because there's been calls around tech companies do not have the capacity to self-regulate. We don't have this industry, codes that they could be able to use for a long time. I think there was a picture coming out of the AI summit of, I think, Dario from Anthropic and Sam Altman not holding hands when everyone was holding hands. So if it's looking at industry standards and industry self-regulation, that may not be able to happen. Titi.
I always ask myself, where do you even start? Self-regulation is very possible, but it just takes a willingness to actually do it. When you are building as a siloed institution, as your own institution, you already make the effort to self-regulate in ways where you can be compliant with existing laws. Now, the ability as industry to co-self-regulate, yes, sometimes is hindered by competition, but that is where government comes in. Mandate it. Mandate the fact that you need to meet a certain standard. I will say it again. There is nothing new under the sun. My laptop is trying to die on me, right? Which means that there is a place of being able to pull together, and we have the standards in place. It's a different thing on who's actually ensuring that those standards are being adhered to. Now, Adam, I hear you in terms of this is really like there's certain things that have happened and you feel like, okay, it's not that intense, but actually it is. I'm trying to follow the comments in the chat as well. And I see that Joanne Jesoni, who's a space lawyer, talks about how the application of the ITAR to this space tells you exactly how this is unprecedented. Now, historically, has government been in a position to actually pull things back? Absolutely. It's just a frontier model. But if it can happen with the frontier model, then it can happen across other layers as well. I do feel as well that, again, because it's not really any new behavior, it's just overt in terms of how dependent everyone is. We as a continent have an opportunity to be able to step in. Do I feel it would be great if we actually are at the forefront of the AI model development, etc.? It would be great. Allow me to say this. Technically, we are at it. It's just that as individuals, as immigrant experts who are sitting in these spaces, our people are sitting there. We are sitting there. But our governments need to rethink their approach and their ability to be able to ensure that when the creations happen, we can build further on it on the continent. And that comes with, sincerely, again, enabling environments. We are consistently grappling with this idea of, oh, our resources are being taken and they're being further developed. But are we ensuring that the spaces that we are creating on the continent is helping the engineer is helping the coder, is helping the one fiddling with models, is helping with the one trying to figure out how we need to co-regulate? Are we ensuring that they actually can continue to operate on the continent? I'm a bit concerned that the narrative sometimes sounds like, and I know I'm making a lot of really quick points because, again, we just have 1 hour, that the narrative is we're jumping from we feel like we have just two options: align with what's coming out of, maybe three, align what's coming out of the US or align with what's coming out of China. But we actually don't. We as a continent have the builders, we have the funding, we have the policy geeks, we have the legal minds that can actually help us build on what we have. And this is not based on where that person or where those capacities are located. It's about our willingness to be able to harness it. And that's why, for me, for example, in my article, I actually referenced the Canada-Africa strategy. Yes, there's always been a lot of strategy. There's nothing perfect. But we actually have opportunity to build on things. So rather than continuously sit down and say, oh, it never worked in the past, that's fine, that's the past. What can we do to move the conversation forward as us, right? At this point in time, what can we leverage? Linda asked me, am I going to be in Geneva? And I said, oh, in Geneva, what's happening in Geneva? Of course, I remember that, oh, the AI dialogue is happening in Geneva. But a part of me is also quite jaded. That doesn't mean that if there's a great opportunity to have impactful conversations that will move the needle forward. And note I said the needle, I'm happy to have it. But we need to recognize that as a continent, our AI strategies need to be revisited immediately. At least it's happening now. We have Ghana launched, Mauritius launched, and I've been following the great thing that Lawyers Hub has been doing in terms of just keeping us abreast of what has been shifted, right? We have an opportunity now to go back and take a look at those strategies, right? This is our opportunity. Take a look at all the strategies we have on the continent. Where are some of the gaps that we're seeing immediately in terms of access to access, in terms of localization, in terms of safety and responsibility? And again, it's not just on the continent that we have these issues. I've looked at the Canada AI strategy, and there are so big gaps. And you're like thinking, I'm sorry, who helped you develop this? Did they not have, at the very least, a couple of people that could just sit and say, this is how you need, these are the core sections that you need. And we need that comparison. The comparative analysis that you just did in terms of continuity of access. We need it just looking at I'm happy to work with you guys gratis, just building this out. What are the critical parts that are missing? And we're not doing it in ways that to just critique the government, but actually to move things forward. You and I need to have a conversation about the fact that they will not hire Linda Bonyo directly. Because it goes back again. I'm very practical. If you ever heard me speak, I will speak in technical terms. But how can we implement things immediately? Is usually my strategy. Yeah. We say we have the AFICTA. We talk about inter-Africa trade. We talk about the digital corridor and being able to ensure that we can do things intercontinentally. But are we talking about how we are harnessing the expertise that sits in the minds of the humans who can help South Africa shape its legal environment, even though they are Kenyan? And then I'm going to bring it home because for me it really matters. Nigerian by birth, spent 17 years living in South Africa, Canadian by choice. Strategic identification of countries that will enable my expertise to travel across borders. And I did not become Canadian until the last 6 years, thereabout 5 years. Why? Because I recognize that passport privilege prevents my ability to be able to implement my expertise. How are we addressing it as a continent? I have a lot of startup and engineers that I work with, last point. But even sometimes being able to get them to show up, for example, in Kenya, and I'm doing my best not to mention, but I will mention the xenophobic activity happening out of South Africa. We're talking about the spazzers. It's not just the spazzers that it's affecting. We have intellectual minds who have capability, who are sitting out of South Africa, but who do not feel comfortable staying there. Why? Because of all the tensions around immigration. Enough of it. There's enough of a division that has been created by Anglophone, Lusophone, and Francophone colonial powers that has divided us. Can we get rid of that and just embrace the fact that we're diverse people? Yes, we are different ethnicities, but our expertise, our capacity needs to be able to flow the same way anybody can flow in the EU or even the US or the US and Canada.
I agree.
Why are we doing this to ourselves? So yes,
I
Anthropic,
agree
we
with you.
pull things back, absolutely. But how are we making sure the expertise that exists, that I can show up at any point in time in Egypt without somebody pulling me aside and saying, oh, what are you doing here? Sorry,
I agree with you.
but those are that's the entire gamut of the issues that we have. Anthropic,
Thank you.
Claude 5
Yeah.
recall is a wake-up call that if we do not, even if we build our own things, will Adam be able to travel to Morocco without being pulled back? Will Linda be able to show up in Ghana to implement her expertise and vice versa without being pulled back? So the problems
I
that we
agree with
see, absolutely. But on the continent, we still have this issue and we need to address it. Our AI strategy needs to address it, and it needs to tie effectively into the AFCTA in ways that ensure it's not just the infrastructure cooperation that ensures not just the digital cooperation, but it also ensures expert collaboration where I'm not seen as an query, but I'm actually seen as someone who is willing to build the continent. Okay, I'm done for that. See?
Thank you so much, Titi. You make such great points. And coordination is a problem in the continent. We're convening this Africa AI Governance Summit, and people have questions like, who are you? Why do you want to do it? And then you have this whole at the top, forgive me for mentioning names, but I'm tired of the fight between Smart Africa and the African Union. It is annoying because we then cannot have one African Union that can ideally just work on digital issues. And so it looks like the African Union strategy is a suggestion. It's not a suggestion. I think we need to focus and build something. We need to quickly, so you have an African Union that has no resources. I want to urge everyone in this room, nobody should fund you to divide Africa. Nobody should give you money to divide any ecosystem. Be the platform that everyone comes in and feels at home and builds, because that's really, really important. I think, and I've said this for a long time, digital prosperity for Africa means digital prosperity for the world. So, for example, in 2017, we had the elections in Kenya, and Cambridge Analytica was named to actually have been part of this particular conversation, messed up the elections because we did not have the power to fix it. These people still went for Brexit. They still went for the 2016 elections in the US because it was not fixed in Africa. It is in our best interest that we contribute to the world, and make sure that these things don't generate in Africa and that they are exported elsewhere, because people are using Africa as a lab. And in terms of AI as well, American workers are currently moving to Nairobi. I've been sort of, lawyers know things, but I've been seeing a trend that people keep coming to Nairobi as digital nomads because they've lost their tech jobs in Silicon Valley. And so Nairobi is the cheapest place they can now afford to move to. But when we start sort of tying these conversations globally, people are like, no, it doesn't concern Africa, just leave it at that. But no, anything that's happening in Silicon Valley, you will see it show up in South Africa, you'll see it show up in Kenya, you'll see it show up, whatever is happening in Paris will affect Senegal. And so I want to urge us to continue to show up in these spaces, that we make our voices known, because people don't know what they want. Steve Jobs says that customers don't know what they want. And even America, as they're taking technology, they have no idea what is coming to them, because it's coming to Africa, then it will bounce back to the rest of the American continent. So America as a continent, but also the US as a country. So let's go to the questions very quickly. I've seen, Diana, your hand has been up. I don't know if it's by choice or by design. If you have any comment or question, please lift up your hand and say, maybe I don't understand what's going on, but it's fine. It's okay. We're still going to read on export controls. We are not American experts, and especially on legislation, but I urge you to go in and read and know what's going on. Diana, you want to speak? Diana Mary Nalu Yange. Diana, you have a question? I think you're getting permission to speak. Anyone else who wants to make a comment? Going once. Tafadzwa, please proceed. And then we'll go to Osas Ezekiel Obazele. Tafadzwa, let us know what you do and where you're calling in from.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Dr. Luke Tafadzwa. I'm based in South Africa. I'm an economist by profession, and what you're discussing is quite interesting to me because I'm actually into international trade. My worry is can we talk about sovereignty when we don't own even the data itself? Because we don't have our own data. So I think we've got a long mile to catch up. We don't own the data. We don't own our data. So how do we then start talking about sovereignty and control when ideally we are controlling something that is not within our hands? And I want to politicize this very well, like everyone else has been doing. I'm worried that every corner where we've got an avenue as African economy to grow, there's always something that is thrown to disturb that. For instance, if you want to go back to COVID, if you want to go back to no uranium enrichment in Africa, there's always something that is thrown just to disturb that. And I'm worried that we don't have the time and we might not even catch up. So I just wanted to find out how we then start working the supply chain from where it starts, rather than us just talking at a higher level. I just want to hear the experts in the room to say, how do we even initiate owning our own data? Because right now, it's not with us. So how do we unlock this? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Tafadzwa. You start from the basics, which is really, really great. How do we own our own data? Somebody asked this online. I almost laughed. They're like, we're so dependent on American tech. We have no idea. My MacBook, they all started crying and ringing. My phone, everything, my Apple Watch. And so there's a temptation to sort of de-Americanize our technology. But I don't even think that's the response, because China will do the same thing to us. The EU has done the same thing with legislation, because almost all the African data protection frameworks are borrowed from GDPR, and we see the effect of AI Act alive in the continent. So it's not necessarily an American thing, but it's something that I think affects us because people had become dependent on this one particular technology. So let's go to the next comment, and then we'll come back to we go to Osas Ezekiel. Then Joe, and then Ben Sihanya. Try keep it to 30 seconds. Ezekiel, we can't hear you.
Oh, okay. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for this webinar. My name is Osas. I'm a lawyer from Nigeria. This digital sovereignty, to be honest, I do not really know so much about it. It's too new to me, and I'm just gathering. But my own question I would like to ask is this: although it's going to be a startup from what our South African friend spoke on, the truth is we can never be totally sovereign if we depend on other persons. Also, we cannot also start afresh because we cannot start anything or nothing. We will have to still rely. My question is, how do we make our own authentic? And also, like I pointed out, if Africa is being used as a startup point, how do we regulate those persons coming in? Because if it were us, they will also regulate our coming in over there. Another thing I would like to ask is this: can we have an Africa united um, body where there's a United Africa regulation body that regulates how AI is used in Africa, how things are set up, a strategy that is uniquely to us Africans before we now start disseminating it to different sections such as East Africa, North Africa, South Africa, West Africa, and the rest. Because we have to first.
Thank you so much, Osas. Think about an AI potluck. If we are having AI potluck and everyone is bringing something, Kenya will bring the data labelers, South Africa will bring the data centers. Who's bringing what? If you're on the chat, let us know what you're thinking about. What can we do so everybody else is engaged for this potluck? Ben Sihanya and then Joe Ishie.
Oh, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, perfectly.
Hello?
Proceed, we can hear you.
Yes, this is a very timely, very briefly, this is a very timely webinar. I work on intellectual property, consumer law, and education law at UON Law School and senior advocate. So I think that just 2 or 3 measures that we really need to take is that the question of export control has been around for a long time. It will always be there. We can guarantee that. I remember when we started studying these technology questions much more intensely, there were the question of military technology transfer, Cold War issues in the late 80s, early 90s. And then there were the issues of semiconductor chips and superconductivity, etc., were very big issues, US, Japan, etc., etc. And then, so it will always be there. So what can, and it's many times is done in what those countries perceive as the national or strategic interest. So as African countries individually and collectively, EAC, COMESA, AU, etc., have we really clearly defined our strategic national and regional, sub-regional interests in terms of technology? We really need to continue working on that. We see some stuff, but we still really need to work on that in terms of developing capability in the relevant areas, but also developing some kind of better procurement strategy so that even if we don't have the technology, how we procure it, we do it in a way that we pool resources. So those are some of the issues which have been on the table for some time, since the Lagos Plan of Action of 1980. The question is implementation. The question is actually most of it is implementation and upscaling. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Prof. You mentioned things that happened when I wasn't there. So I'm very grateful that you're here.
I am an ancestor. I am an ancestor or a person.
No, they say you're a spirit. So I'll go to Joe, and then we'll go back to our panelists and wrap it up. Joe is here. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Bonyo. I'm very familiar with the work of Madam Titi Akinsanmi when I was working with the American Business Council. So I work with Nigeria Africa, and these conversations are really spot on, but I just want to highlight, so when we're discussing sovereignty, I think we need to look at it from a point of an angle where we could foster shared digital infrastructure. So we've talked about US, China, EU, the European Union. All of these entities or regions have their capabilities. So when we're looking down within the African perspective, we need to rethink how we think or rethink the modeling around digital sovereignty. So for instance, if we're saying, because the AEFCFTA protocol also considers the shared digital infrastructure, connectivity, and all of that. But within buckets of government, you hear, oh, we need to start talking about how we look at sovereignty, whether data has to be stored in the country, and et cetera, et cetera. But to be very frank, most of the countries on the continent can't afford the required infrastructure. So when we're looking at digital sovereignty, let's look at it from a point of angle of shared digital infrastructure. And the people or the entities that can push this will be the financing arms. So look at AFDB or AFC or Afrexim Bank. Those are the people, those are the entities that we can really, I won't say arm twist, but arm twist for the lack of a better word, countries to see how they can share infrastructure rather than looking at how to get individual infrastructure, because it's not going to be very, very feasible if we're going to be very, very frank with ourselves. So yeah, we should look at how these entities can do that. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Joe. You raise great points on moving the conversation from, the data has to be in Africa, it has to rest here, it's not going. I think that's what it has been dominated this sovereignty debate in Africa. It's all about localization, but I think it's beyond that. And thanks for raising that as well. I think Professor Sihanya mentioned about this multilateral approach, that we just don't give it to states to do this. The CHIPS debate, I think, has been successful this far because of having these conversations multilaterally. So what's what do we do there? Third, I think the national security debate on what happens for national security. The government will always pull this national security card when they want to do something. Last week, I had an interview on Kenya's government wanting to sell our data from eCitizen, all of eCitizen data. And so I don't know what's wrong with us, but our own researchers cannot even access this data, but we want to sell it. Who will buy it? Of course, it's the big tech companies that will be able to afford this. We need better procurement laws. I think that has also been mentioned. And then we have the question of shared infrastructure, digital infrastructure. So yeah, let's go to some solutions. I was sharing my slide on what we said earlier on what do we do in terms of moving forward. Do we amend the strategies? Titi has talked about this. What's a model sovereignty law? What do they look like? I have news for you people on who wants to come up with regulations on cloud within the continent. It's not our conversation anymore. It needs to be our conversation. So let's go to our panelists. I'll start with you, Adam, on how you answer these questions and maybe your closing remarks.
Yeah, thank you, Linda. I think, regardless of your risk assessment on, how urgent it is to implement any of these policies, I think we can all agree that moving in the right direction is absolutely necessary in light of the events of this past week. I think it's clear that risk classification by use case is probably a good thing to think about. Critical public services like health records, court systems, emergency response. We probably need to pretty urgently start thinking about how we can diversify, the technology that is being relied on for those services. And then I think the lower stakes commercial uses, maybe we can tolerate some more risk for now, but still need to start moving in the right direction. I also like the mention of open weight models as being a partial hedge. But I think that, self-hosting an open weight model, it removes the remote kill switch of the US or another country, eliminating the technology. But you also need the compute dependency, the chips, the cloud infrastructure, and the talent and the maintenance burden. So I think it really underscores that even with relying on the open weight models, you're going to need to build up the infrastructure as well. I think the partnership guarantees and the contracts is really important. And also the AU's continental AI strategy gap needs to be addressed to make sure that we're thinking about continuity with all of this. So I think wrapping up my thoughts, this past week has really just underscored how rapidly the landscape is moving. And, whatever, we're having this conversation now, but in a few weeks, there could be an entirely new issue that's brought up that we need to address. So I think staying flexible, continuing to have these conversations and building up infrastructure is going to be key.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Adam. Adam is joining us this summer at the Lawyers Hub. He is at Harvard Law, and we are working on some great reports. Every fellow who's on the call, we have 97 fellows from 30 countries. Thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it. And so we finally close with Titi. What are your thoughts as we close, and also with the questions that have been asked?
Okay, so for the questions that have been asked, in light of the timing that we have, I actually have responded to the data one in the chat very clearly. Those are my initial thoughts around what we can do in terms of how do we own our data. We give away what we want to give away, but we give it away with knowledge. I've tried to capture it. But to wrap up very deliberately, because I do believe what Adam has shared speaks to the positions that I have around open weights, around our ability to be able to ensure we have the right stack, around having some of what I have called standards that can be certified in ways that ensures whatever stack you're building is critical, is usable. But I will say very quickly that the hybrid stack architecture and ensuring that we have a multilingual model redundancy, that literally means in English that we can't just have one place where you're hosting things. You need to have a backup of a backup of a backup. And this is why I keep saying that these are things that we know. But I want to finish with the paragraphs in terms of our path forward. That technology consistently reflects our collective intent, but we should never, ever confuse, and this is why I said Adam referenced it, temporary geopolitical anxieties that we see with the true trajectory of innovation itself, because innovation will continue to happen. I mentioned earlier, we should not be overcorrected by, then thinking, oh, what are reciprocal restrictive export controls that needs to be able to be put in place around the innovations that we have or around our data. Actually, that would just signal to the global market that, unilateral dependency is structural vulnerability. Yes, it is. But the future of intelligence should not be dictated, and I agree with this, by one geographic cluster. It shouldn't be. It shouldn't be by North America, by the US. It shouldn't be done by us, right? And it shouldn't be dictated either by one private sector entity. right? Deciding that we cannot comply, therefore we're going to shut everything down, which comes down to this. And I'm saying this very clearly to our African governments. We cannot revert to a place where centralized monopoly is our default, because it will fracture what is our nascent emerging sector, right? I'm looking at the people on the call, and I wish we had enough time. I wanted to be able to do a poll that this is around policy. Do we have any of those who are building and innovating on the continent on this call? This has always been my clarion call. And this is why I'm deliberate about working with startups and those who are building. Because sometimes it's seen as, you don't deal with government until you have to deal with government. But by the time you have to deal with government, you're already in trouble. And as such, anything you're trying to build is delayed. And on the flip side is that it's seen that government will delay you. That's why they don't want to engage. Or we need to know that these conversations, the kinds that are being hosted by Lawyers Hub, with policy fellows, those who are actively working on ensuring that innovation can continue to happen with the right regulatory environment, is happening with those who are innovating on our continent. And I don't see enough of it. Why? Because I sit in that space. I'm deliberate about hosting conversations, intimate ones, that actually connects the dots. So, sincerely, we have an opportunity ahead of us with this. It's not new. It's been done to us before. As a continent, we need to dig deep on what we're currently doing, but we need to do it in ways where infrastructure, where regulatory environment, where builders, where the ones who are helping to shape the regulatory ecosystem are actually working together, not in silos. And kudos to you, for mentioning the division that's existing between AI, the AU and Smart Africa. If we're that divisive amongst ourselves, we don't need an enemy from outside. We're already doing ourselves in, and enough is enough. Sincerely.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, Titi. And thank you, Adam. Thank you so much for your thoughts and expertise on this particular matter. We are so grateful that everyone could join us today. I would want to say that, we have everything we need to build. We have everything we need to build, whether you're American, whether you're African. We need to have new ideas. We need to build together. No one should be so powerful that the other person does not have anything. There are still people who cannot access these tools. I'm generally concerned by, what Sam Altman said. OpenAI CEO, he said that we are going to begin to treat intelligence like a meter. And he said the same way you pay for electricity is the same way that this is going to happen. And that was really sad to hear because it means that people who cannot afford electricity, you have to pay at the end of the month. The people that helped to build OpenAI in Kenya years ago cannot afford $20 a month now to pay for a monthly subscription. And so it is in our best interest that our future is shared. The principles that belong in, Zimbabwe's AI strategy on Ubuntu, around the fact that, I am because you are, we belong together. I think that is what we need to focus on as we proceed. This episode will be available on YouTube. Please ask your friend to watch it. Please go and read about export controls because they're relying on your ignorance to continue to do the things that they do. And they're relying on the fact that you're busy and you cannot be able to update yourself or to civically engage. But we want to bring this to attention every week so that you could be able to join us. Next week, like Adam said, there will be new issues, either to distract us or to push us. But I think that one of the takeaways here is, can we come together and do some writing? I want to push you to think about this potluck concept. What are you bringing to the AI, stack? Is South Africa bringing this? What's Kenya bringing? What's Gambia bringing to the table? Your country can bring in something so that Africa ideally owns, it's different things within the AI stack. At the Lawyers Hub, we're so grateful that you could join us today. Thank you, Ken, and the media team, and Emmanuel, Winnie, everyone who made this particular episode happen. We're really grateful for your support. And hopefully see you next Monday if it's not a holiday in Kenya and we're not tired. And there's so many things to think about, but we hope that you can be able to join us next Monday. Also join us in Geneva. If you can, we're going to try to live stream all the sessions that we'll be at so that we involve you. Many of us are not able to get visas. I'm annoyed that people in Uganda have to come to Kenya to look for visas because there's no embassy in their country. But we are working day and night to make sure that, this happens. Those who put in the chat, I'm so sorry I wasn't able to follow them because there's a lot of things happening. But I encourage anyone who will be watching this recording to attend so that you can be able to read all the comments the next time and engage with people. I am hungry. They say whatever you're going through, always eat fast. So before you go to your next meeting, please go and eat so that you don't annoy people in your next call. Whatever you're going through, eat fast. I wish you all the very best. Thank you, Titi. Thank you, Adam. Have a good one, guys. Bye.